I hope you remember what I remember, that is 30,000 people were saved in the immediate aftermath of the storm by U.S. military personnel, by Louisiana law enforcement, and by citizens who volunteered.
That's President George W. Bush. He's in New Orleans today for the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, touting the lives saved by our government's efforts. A message former FEMA Director Michael Brown was hoping to hear. He says it's time for people to stop blaming him for this whole disaster. Mr. Brown, good to have you here on the show. Have you been sort of falsely tarnished by all of the events that happened there?
Well, rather than me say anything, let's listen to what Andy Card said on the Fox News documentary that aired last Friday night. And Andy Card said that Michael Brown was not part of the problem, and when problems arose, that Michael Brown was not given the opportunity to be a part of the solution. So, and I believe Andy Card, and that is exactly what happened.
So
and I'm also
how
glad
were you
to hear
not given that opportunity, Michael? How did you not have that opportunity?
Well, there were a couple of things that happened. Under the Stafford Act, the FEMA director reports directly to the president. Mm-hmm. And suddenly, I mean, Tom Ridge, the first Secretary of Homeland Security, honored that process that had always been used. And then Michael Chertoff came in, and Michael Chertoff broke that chain of command. So we now had an added level of bureaucracy on top of us. So when I would execute a mission assignment and say, I need X, well, that went up through a new chain of command that took extra hours and sometimes extra days.
That had to have been immensely frustrating for you to see that kind of bureaucracy at a time when the country really needed you to be able to just act.
It was incredibly frustrating, and I'll tell you, the saving grace, Trish, is that in the post-Katrina Act, Congress, even after vilifying me, Congress came back and said, you know what, Mr. Brown's right. We really need to codify that chain of command and put it back the way that it is.
I got to tell you, Michael, I spent a lot of time there in the aftermath of Katrina, reporting there. People were in a pretty bad spot, of course, and there was frustration because there would be FEMA trailers lined up in basically these big parking lots for these trailers, and there were people that desperately needed them and they couldn't get them. So there were the trailers just a few blocks away. They couldn't get them onto their front lawns. And it really seemed to me to speak to the bureaucracy in our government. And that's, you know, that, as you said, it was frustrating for you. It was frustrating for the people of New Orleans. If you could go back and do it all over again, what would you change?
I think I would have stood up in front of I would have used you guys, and I would have stood up in front of the cameras and said, I don't know what the hell's going on back in D.C., but it's got to stop, and it's got to stop now. Which is one reason why I'd asked President Bush to land in Baton Rouge, because I thought if he could just walk down the steps of Air Force One and he could speak to the public and speak to the cabinet and tell the cabinet, give this guy whatever he wants, I think that could have changed things.
Was there not the will to do that?
I think it wasn't that there wasn't the will. I think that there was this continuing trying to make things work the way they were supposed to work. And every time something would go back to D.C., it would take, you know, an extra 5 hours. And by the time we realized how bad things were, well, to put it kindly, the bus had already run over me. And that's just, you know, that's politics. That's the way it works.
Well, and that's also sometimes big bloated government. And that's
it is.
When you get that kind of bureaucracy.
All
right, Michael Brown,
exactly
wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trish.
All right.